Welcome to Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and you can follow me on Twitter at Braden Gall.
Mine's Erin Dugan. You can follow me on Twitter at the Erin Dugan or Instagram Erin_Dugan. Almost forgot my own handle.
Listen, this is the time of year where every time you open up the internet, you're going to see a ranking of some sort, right? We're ranking coordinators, we're ranking quarterbacks, we're ranking jobs, we're ranking programs, and we've already done the quarterback thing on the show. But right. I wanted to have a conversation about the programs because there's all kinds of new recruiting rules coming in. The portal's about to open. Spring practice is about to wrap up. We've got an Arkansas State of the Union for you guys with Trey Biddy from Hog Sports, 24/7 Sports, going to give you a great in-depth analysis of where the Hogs are. And in that conversation, we discussed sort of what are reasonable expectations for Arkansas in the playoff era. We said that we did the same conversation with Neil McCready last week about Ole Miss. What are reasonable expectations for programs like Ole Miss in the playoff era? So we thought, well, let's just take a look at all 14 and say which ones have the national championship DNA, which ones have sort of playoff DNA and that can routinely make the playoffs, and how often should these teams be making the playoffs? So we're going to have some fun today on the show. Erin, doing some rankings on the pod.
Do you want to explain why you're calling it DNA versus just potential or resources or whatever?
So I've always used this phrase, and
it makes sense to me. That's why I'm telling you to explain it, because I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, this is going to upset me now that I have to give somebody credit for the actual term. Our former boss, Mitch Light, is technically the one. He and I used to talk about this on our national podcast, and frankly, Steven and I just talked about it a little bit on our show as well.
Right.
National championship DNA, in my opinion, is comprised of largely two things.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, rate, review, subscribe, check out the YouTube page, all that great stuff. We're giving hats away. Just want to get that out of the way. Forgot about
There you go.
National title DNA is unlimited resources and access to talent. So geography and money, basically. Or in another phrase, passionate fans, right? It's boosters, it's budgets, it's athletic department size and alignment. Your geography dictates who is within a 6-hour radius of your campus that you can acquire to play football games for you.
Right. You can't change it. You were born that way.
Largely, I mean, geography doesn't change. Population trends have changed over time, but very slowly, right? Like there were a lot more athletes in Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania in the 60s and 70s. Integration is a thing that changes.
Yep.
What takes place. I think NIL collectives, but again, that's kind of tied back to, fan resources.
Right.
I think changing conferences like Missouri and Texas A&M joined the SEC, and their DNA improved. It got better because of a lot of different things. Texas and Oklahoma are going to do this as well. I just think DNA changes. Evolution happens very slowly.
You can upregulate it.
And I think you can go down. I mean, Nebraska, for example.
Yeah, and you can downregulate it, but you still got some things in place.
And it has to happen very slowly. Like, again, since 1991, there's only been about 15 teams that have won a national championship. For 30 years, and every year of the championship game era and every year of the sort of modern internet recruiting era, the championships have been won by the exact same 15-ish schools.
Right.
And we all know who those schools are. The question is, how many SEC schools have that DNA? How many schools can be playoff contenders routinely and maybe can't win national championships? We'll discuss where Arkansas fits into all this, because I think they're kind of right at the line of demarcation. And then, obviously, where do Texas and Oklahoma rank in all of this, and what does that do to the DNA? So,
yeah, and then the factors that also are part of that could potentially be beneficial. I mean, we could argue, we talk about it with South Carolina a lot, and we could do the same thing with Texas A&M, of them having these certain characteristics or things already in place, whether that be geography or fan base or recruiting talent within the state, but that they haven't totally come to fruition or capitalized on. So maybe we can talk about those too.
I think A&M, Arkansas, and Carolina, which will probably be all ranked very closely.
Yes.
I find to be I think that tier of team in the SEC is utterly fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
and all three of those have what I was just talking about, factors that could and should be used to their advantage, but they haven't totally seemed to figure out how to use them yet.
Bingo. Proof of, like, the third category of national title DNA that doesn't really count, but it sort of is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe that's the wrong phrase. Is like proof of concept. Like, The Florida Gators have won national titles in multiple decades. The Tennessee Volunteers have won national titles in multiple decades. Alabama's got the greatest 2 dynasties in the history of college football for a reason. Georgia's won championships in multiple decades. Same for LSU has had 3 straight different coaches win national championships. Auburn has, a very wild list of coaches that have basically competed and almost won national championships.
It's like it's the have you been there gene. Like act like you've been places.
A little bit.
Well, the possibility, isn't that kind of what you're saying though? The possibility,
yeah.
like it's been done, it's been done. It's like, if you can see it, you can be it kind of thing.
Right. And like hypothetically, Tennessee would have made it, for example, Tennessee would have made the playoff this past year, 12-team playoff. They won a national championship in the BCS era. They won a championship back in the 60s. Like that is and they're a top 10 team all time in terms of wins. They are a top 10 winning program in the history of college football. They have unlimited resources, and their recruiting base is better than people think. I'm not trying to get into a Tennessee conversation right away, but like Tennessee clearly has it and has shown that it has capitalized on it. A&M is the one that hasn't shown that it's capitalized on it yet. So we'll get
and
to
arguably
A&M.
Has less excuses than anybody, except for the length of time they've been in the conference and how much experience they've had playing with these teams. The state, the talent, and the money and the fandom, you're looking at it with, that's why we look at them with a huge question mark all the time, because we're like, what the F is happening over there?
Yeah, and you have a coach, one of like 5 coaches in the country that has a ring. All right, so if we're gonna rank the best jobs, like I have 2 ahead of everybody else. What
as
do
a coach?
So you could also, this is another way to do this exercise. You could also just call it the Nick Saban test. If you put 14 Nick Sabans, if you clone Saban and you put him at all 14 schools in the SEC, and you clean the slate of the roster, right? Like there's nobody has a 5-star quarterback. Nobody has like just.
So the talent level is the same too? You got to start over recruiting?
Well, don't think of it literally. Just think of it as like you are given the Georgia program, you're given the Auburn program, you're given the LSU program, and kind of as is, but not necessarily with transient stuff, right? Like take away NCAA sanctions, take away the current roster, take away the athletic director.
Take away the current roster?
Because we're looking at this over a 100-year period of time, not a 1-year period of time.
Okay.
Like Georgia right now,
I want clear directions, please.
Fair enough. Georgia right now is clearly the most dominant program in college football. They're the best program in college football.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, they're not a better program than Alabama.
Right.
Now, would I rather, if I was a coach, would I rather live in Athens than Tuscaloosa? Probably. I'd probably rather live in Athens. But that's not necessarily what the Nick Saban test is. The Nick Saban test is all 14 of you are given Nick Saban, and, the starter's gun is fired and you're off and running, and 14 Nick Sabans are all doing the same job at 14 different places.
Okay.
Where do the natural advantages and financial resources give Nick Saban the advantage to win more quicker? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Like this is interesting.
If you put Saban at Tennessee and you put Saban at Kentucky, he is going to win more games faster and compete for national championships faster at Tennessee than he would at Kentucky. Just in my opinion.
And then that makes sense. And then for like, if it was, you could even argue that Texas A&M, if you put him there, it might take him a second to get it back on its feet. But if you got that thing oiled like or that was a well-oiled machine, that could be a generational legacy program, because once it's there, if you can keep it, it's not going anywhere.
I can make it even simpler. If you put Nick Saban at your school, can you win a national championship?
Mine, no.
And that's exactly it. If you have the DNA,
I mean, maybe
then the coach can win the national championship. And that's where I think the interesting conversation lies with A&M, Arkansas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri. I think a lot of those teams are playoff teams. I'm not sure how many could win 4 games in a playoff, a 12-team playoff, or win the SEC championship enough to give them a bye in the playoff. And it's one thing to get to the playoff. We know that's life altering for programs like Kentucky and Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the goal for Alabama, LSU, and Georgia, and A&M, and Auburn.
It's to win, to
win those 3 extra games, those 4 extra games. So
you haven't even mentioned Florida.
And Florida obviously has national championship DNA.
And recruiting pool.
Right, and the resources have finally caught up. Billy Napier's putting those resources to work. So what's the best job? I think it's a no-brainer, but there's people that argue that it's Georgia. I think it's Alabama, but
Well, I think it's easy to argue Alabama because he's done it there. I think that if we're doing the Nick Saban thing, I mean, I think I think the best job could be Texas A&M. Right now, it's not. Like, but if you put him there on the ability to maintain it over a large period of time, resources aren't going anywhere, recruiting talent's not going anywhere. You know, your crazy ass cult fan base isn't going anywhere. Like, that would be something that you could maintain. But maybe that's not the question. If the question is now, it almost has to be between Georgia and Alabama, and I don't think that you can take Georgia over Alabama for that particular question because it hasn't been done like Alabama's done it.
So it's not just today, it's all time and moving forward, knowing that DNA evolves very, very slowly. To me, the difference between Georgia and Alabama and everyone else in the SEC is alignment. They never have a problem from like the janitor up to like, and the last person sitting in the last row in the stadium, and like the biggest booster and the athletic director and the head coach and the staffers and the play, like those are big giant cruise ships that move very slowly, but they all work together. There's rarely any like chaos with like boosters upheaval like there is at A&M or Auburn or Tennessee. Like,
yeah.
To me, they are the most stable and most aligned. There's a reason that Bear Bryant and Nick Saban both happened at Alabama. Like, there's a reason, right?
Yeah.
And Georgia, for my money, I could argue is the best program in America because here's the thing about Georgia. You guys are a little less batshit crazy.
That's true.
Than everybody else.
Yeah.
And I kind of dig that about Georgia, but.
And of course, like a lot of this, the Southeast and all of, from Tennessee, Georgia, all the way to Alabama and over. I mean, those recruiting, like your talent pools overlap quite a bit. Georgia is the only one in its state.
Yep.
And, Auburn hasn't, in the past couple of years, Auburn struggled to be where they like to be in terms of the SEC and national rankings, but they are still pulling. There is a lot of talent within the state. I mean, if you grew up in Alabama, you have any kind of sports blood running through your veins, you are either Alabama or Auburn. There's not really a lot of in between. So they're still pulling major talent. I mean, Alabama seems to rack up fine, but.
Yeah, and you talk about like slow evolution, like the fact that Georgia used to be like the 5th or 6th best talent state in the country is now it's like number 2 or 3. Like the Southern population trends and the athlete production. Frankly, Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, when I was in high school in 1999, and I was a senior and I was playing football in the state of Tennessee and got offers to play at Tennessee Tech, let's call it. There were maybe 4 or 5 like Power 5 prospects in the state of Tennessee. Maybe. There are now 40 in the state of Tennessee every year that are going to the Power 5 and or at least FBS. Georgia has gone from 4, 5, 6, 7th in the country in production to now like basically behind only Texas and Florida, basically, if not better. So that also helps Georgia. I think it's Bama, Georgia 1 and 2. I see the argument for Georgia at 1, but I would go Bama 1 based on historical context.
Yeah, the stability factor, but Georgia is not riddled with chaos though. So I think that Georgia has the potential to be that, but then you get into, I just talked about A&M and from a resource and excitement state, and there's nothing else going on there besides Texas in College Station, besides the university. I mean, but they're chaos schools that have a history of chaos. Well, A&M, LSU, Auburn,
Tennessee,
Florida. Like they all have more chaos. And a lot of that is coming from the very highest level. Like things have happened in administration. I mean, I don't have to give examples about LSU.
Boosters.
It's very boosters, trying to cover stuff up, breaking rules. Everyone's broken rules within collegiate athletics for the most part, at least every program at some point. But the stability factor of Alabama and Georgia, to me, are far beyond the rest of the schools.
And the word I will use to describe that is alignment.
Yep, that's fair.
The biggest problem Auburn has had, and Tennessee before they finally figured it out, is lack of alignment, chaos behind the scenes, leadership chaos causes problems. There's some South Carolina, I think, has every possible piece to this puzzle, but some of it is that up in the legislative office, it's not all completely aligned because there's a lot of Clemson folk involved in all that stuff. So, all
There
right. So,
is no, I mean,
because
go
here's
ahead.
as an example, Texas. Where would Texas be ranked? I have them at number 3 behind those two, but Texas should be number 1 because it is worth $1.1 billion. It's the most lucrative, most expensive, biggest, most powerful athletic department in the country. But the reason it is not better than Bama and Georgia is because of all the cooks in the kitchen messing it all up.
Yeah. I think and I think they have the potential to go back to be in that more stable category. But when it comes down to it, the chaos or the cooks in the kitchen, uh, the schools that we're talking about that are sitting above the rest in terms of stability, with being Georgia and Alabama and maybe the potential to be Texas, is a lot of that is the administration of the university not thinking that they know more about sports than the administration of athletics. That's what you run into with a lot of these, like the schools that are lower down the list, and I've seen it firsthand, of the administration of the university thinking they can make major decisions about athletics. At the end of the day, nobody knows more about athletics than the people that are walking through the halls of the athletic department. So I think that's also a differentiating factor in this conversation.
I 1,000,000% agree. And part of the reason Texas is even joining the SEC in the first place is that they've gotten a little bit more aligned at the top of the educational system inside the state of Texas and got people aligned to say, no, 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 we need to be in the SEC. And so that's a signal that they could be becoming more aligned. And if they are, Texas is the most powerful athletic department in the country. They have the elite athletes. They are better than A&M. I'm sorry, Aggies. They just are. They've been to 2 national championship games in the last 2 decades. Texas A&M has been to 0. And that's with all the chaos at Texas. That's with all the bad coaching hires and all the chaos of and they still won a title in 05 and went back in 09. So I would have Texas.
Sometimes it just takes losing more than you like to be like, okay,
yeah.
we got to figure this out. And that's a lot of times when administration and athletics gets back on the same page, is when everybody's lost more than they can mentally and emotionally handle. They're like, let's do something different.
Who's next on your list? So if we're both going to go Bama, Georgia in some order, 1 and 2. Again, I would have Texas at 3. I don't know where you'd put them, but I'd have them at 3. Where, especially once they join the SEC, who are the next programs in? Like, give me the order that you've got, and I'll give you my order, and then we can discuss.
This like third. Well, Texas is definitely in the top 4 for me. I struggled with this third spot a little bit. I think it's A&M or Florida. LSU definitely has. You want to put LSU up there too, because the caliber of the program, they've done it before, we've seen it. But that's, to me, that it's going to take a little bit longer to figure out the chaotic stuff. I think they're on the right track. So
here's
that's hard. What's your number 4?
I've got LSU at so taking Texas out of it.
Oh, so you're saying, okay, so we're not doing Texas.
I've got LSU at 3, Florida at 4.
Mine were flip-flopped.
But I could see both sides. But
yeah, I have Florida at 3, LSU at 4. But if it wasn't for LSU's like getting in trouble and not being able to figure their stuff out off the field in the past few years, they would have been in my 3rd spot.
And a great insight into what Nick Saban does to your program, which is that he sort of brought LSU out of the old era and into the new era.
Put them on the map, yeah.
But the fact that LSU and Florida have 6 combined national championships since the 90s and A&M has 0, I cannot put A&M above those 2 programs, even though they may have a
potential for it.
Yeah, but they don't have a better recruiting base than Florida. Florida's recruiting base is it might be even better. LSU's recruiting base. LSU's recruiting base is ridiculously good as well. Yeah. It's basically the same as A&M. They're within, driving distance. So I LSU, to me, with proof of concept, with Tiger Stadium, I just think LSU at 3, Florida at 4. I'm fine if you like Florida better. I think they've taken a little bit slower to sort of like gain ground in like the modern world of football.
I know. And LSU can put it together quick. Like it can, all of a sudden things just make sense again. It just doesn't take them that growing pains time.
I think Nick Saban,
when they mess it up, they mess it up bad.
Yeah, and I think Saban, like, again, if you read the book on what he did when he got there, I think John Talty, John Talty wrote it, The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all about sort of what he demanded of LSU when he got there, and it was full scale. It's kind of like what Dabo did to Clemson, like full scale investment and reevaluation of how we're going to view our football program, which is kind of what your point is about university administration versus athletic administration, and do they see eye to eye? That's where Bama and Georgia have never had a problem. Like
Right.
they are just always aligned. I would go LSU 3, Florida 4. I would go, here's where it might get controversial. I would go Tennessee at 5, Auburn 6, A&M 7. A&M's the only one of these programs that has never shown it that it can do it. It's never won the national title in the modern era since integration. It's never, like it has all the ingredients and all the pieces, but it's never done it.
It's more like the South Carolina complex with me for A&M, not necessarily that they have to be at the top of the list, but more like this should be working. And I guess that's a lot of that's from a resource perspective. I went Tennessee, A&M, Auburn, but that doesn't, now that
That's
we're
fine.
talking through it.
That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, but we've seen Auburn do it. It's just, it's hard to get the modern thoughts about programs out of your head and keep just the historic and the historic nature of it and the longevity, because we've seen Auburn do it too.
I mean, Terry Bowden, undefeated. Pat Dye, national championship. Gene Chizik, national championship. Gus Malzahn went to the national championship. I mean, like Auburn is as good a program as anybody in America.
It's just the chaos. It's the chaos thing we're talking about.
They absolutely have national championship DNA. There's no doubt about it. I think Texas A&M absolutely has national championship DNA. Like they are the Clemson without their Dabo. Like they haven't found their Dabo yet. And Jimbo was supposed to be it, and he's almost got the same kind of name. So
it's like it's some of these programs that get into freak out mode, that they're used to winning and they have to win quickly. And sometimes, like, really, what's the word I'm looking for? Not aggressive, but like when you make an quick decision. What's that called? What's that word?
Abrupt decision. I don't know what.
Yeah, just because you get desperate to win, you're like, okay, well, this isn't working, so we got to start over. Yeah, just like a desperate decision to wipe the slate clean and try something different. And I think sometimes those erratic decisions are made
there you go,
to try to get back to where you used to be. And there's a good balance of, like, he didn't have to take 9 years like Kentucky and Mark Stoops has, but it's working. But you also don't want to make a decision so quick that you're not giving something that could work a shot, which some of those teams just scramble and do crazy stuff.
So all-time historically, Alabama's got the most wins of any program in college football history. Texas is number 4. Oklahoma's number 6. Georgia and Tennessee have identical numbers of wins. They're both number 9 all-time. Georgia's been to 61 bowl games. Tennessee's been to 55. LSU 54. Auburn 49. I looked at every one of these teams has an average of attendance last year over 83, 84, 85,000 people per game at their stadiums. So we're all talking about the biggest stadiums in the country. And I went back and looked at a valuation of the programs. The earliest one, or the most recent one I could find, was from 2020, I believe, which took into account the 2019 fiscal year. So before the pandemic, basically, which kind of, to me, is like an even kind of slate. The number one most valuable program, according to Forbes, in all of college football is Texas, $1.1 billion. Alabama was number 3 at $1.009 billion. How about this? Georgia, number 6, $891 million. Excuse me. Then Oklahoma, number 7.
It drops off from billion. It drops off 800 million.
No. Drops off. No, 1.1 billion to 891 million is only.
Oh, I thought you said 191 million. I was like, geez, 800. That makes more sense.
Oklahoma was number 7 most valuable program in America, 885 million. Number 8 was Auburn, $871 million program. Number 9 was LSU, $852 million program. Number 10 was Tennessee, $727 million program. 11 was Florida, $634 million program. And A&M was number 12, $540 million program. So all top 12. But here's the key. Texas A&M at $540 million is worth half as much money as Texas is at number 1.
That's wild.
So that to me, that
is telling.
And Auburn being as valuable as they were, also pretty big time there. Here's the other one that I thought was interesting. 10 win seasons. How about this? So 10 win seasons, I think, is a good indicator, right?
Okay, yeah.
Alabama, 43 10 win seasons.
Okay.
Oklahoma, 41 10 win seasons. Georgia with 27.
That's a big
Texas
drop
with
off.
24. Yep. Tennessee with 20 10-win seasons. Look how fast we got down into the teens. From
Wow.
40. From 40.
Shit.
17 10-win seasons for LSU. Florida has 16. Auburn has 14. Texas A&M has 12 10-win seasons in its history. So like there's another metric of like proof of concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
10-win season is pretty damn good.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, it is like a different, you don't luck out and win 10 games.
not that many times.
No, not that many times.
South Carolina, four times.
It's hard to luck out and win 10 games once. I mean, you have to be something. I mean, I did witness Vanderbilt have a 9-win season and everyone thought the world was ending, but
yeah, there you go. So this brings us to the Arkansas Razorbacks, who have 12 10-win seasons. South Carolina, 4, by the way, 4 10-win seasons. And I think 3 of them were back-to-back under Spurrier in the same chunk of time. Which brings us to Arkansas.
The South Carolina fans.
Well, no, because I like South Carolina in this situation. We just got to figure out what the hell's going on.
What spot? Yeah.
I have Arkansas at 8, but
So
below the line of teams that have national championship DNA.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they can make the playoff all the time. So can South Carolina, and so can a bunch of these other teams. So here's what we'll do. Let's do some Arkansas State of the Union. We're going to hear from Trey Biddy from Hog Sports. He's going to give us a whole in-depth analysis of the Arkansas Razorbacks. At the end of that conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about what reasonable expectations should be for a program like Arkansas in the modern playoff era. And that will kickstart us into the second half of this conversation where we piss off South Carolina fans. No, actually, I'm going to be very positive about South Carolina.
Yeah.
I think there's so much to like about it. It just hasn't exactly clicked yet. And it's kind of a similar phrase that Arkansas needs, Ole Miss, these other programs. So we'll finish up our rankings in the SEC. But first, an Arkansas Spring State of the Union. And where should the Hogs be during the playoff era? Here's our conversation with Hog Sports expert Trey Biddy. Welcome to the show. Trey, how are you, sir? What's going on, man?
I'm doing good. You know, just spring football about to wrap up here. We've got spring game coming up this weekend, and it's been an interesting 11 practices so far.
Well, got a lot of questions about the coaching staff, about the depth chart, not about the quarterback, of course, but about expectations in the roster and all that stuff. But just what have you learned most through spring practice? Very difficult to learn anything, in my opinion, very specific about teams in spring practice. But what is your overarching sense and takeaway from spring practice so far for Arkansas?
Well, there's a lot because there's a lot of new faces, obviously. I would say overarching, like on defense, I really like kind of the mojo of the defense. There's been a lot of changes on that side of the ball with 3 new coaches, brought in Marcus Woodson, who was passing game defensive coordinator at Florida State, Deron Woodson, who was at Florida, was McNeese State defensive coordinator before that, and then Travis Williams, of course, who's the new defensive coordinator. So they're going to go to a 4-down look, which is different than what Barry Odom had, very attacking style defense. But I just really, it's almost like the emphasis has been, let's over-communicate as much as possible. And I don't know, I like the vibe back there. They brought in some really interesting transfers. Antonio Greer is one at linebacker who was at South Florida, was about to transfer to UCF before Travis Williams took the Arkansas job. But he looks like he's a nice addition. It's a young linebacker core overall, but with him being an older player, a senior, I think he brings some maturity to that group. The secondary, the cornerbacks, I really like where they are. This is a pass defense, keep in mind, that was last in the country, 131 out of 131 in passing yards surrendered last year. And the secondary that looked like at one point it might be a strength for them, but they had so many injuries. So they've really retooled things, obviously, with Barry Odom taking the UNLV job and the new coaches that I just mentioned coming in. But they've also got Lorando Johnson coming in from Baylor, who started for them, a former 4-star recruit, Jaheim Singletary, who's not on campus yet, who's a 5-star recruit from Georgia in the class of 2022. They've got Quincy McAdoo back. They've got Dwight McGlothern back. They're added Al Walcott also from Baylor, who was their second leading tackler last year, probably going to play the nickel. He's been banged up this spring. But they've really added a lot of interesting pieces on defense. They could add some more. Trajan Jeffcoat from Missouri at defensive end. And then on the other side, they've got John Morgan, the third from Pittsburgh. So they've added a lot of interesting pieces. Still need a couple here and there, but I would say that would be my the thing that stands out to me on defense. Looking at offense, obviously Dan Enos, a new offensive coordinator, comes in and installing more of a pro style attack. They'll still do, spread principles, hurry up, stuff like that, but they'll line up under center some more. And, that could be something that helps KJ Jefferson's draft stock. Also got some intriguing transfers there, wide receiver specifically with 3 new additions there. So, they're not done in the transfer portal. They've got 77 on scholarship total, so still got some work to do. But I like what I've seen from defense. I mean, I guess you would consider where they were last year, anything would be better, I guess, based on how the defense played in 2022.
Yeah, not the only team in the SEC West switching to that 4-down look, as it's going to kind of happen across the board with the Mississippi schools as well. Just in general, how do you grade? Because the big question about Sam Pittman, I think, once he kind of established himself as a head coach was, all right, he's got 2 really high-level coordinators. He's going to have to manage that staff. He kind of kept them around an extra year. They both depart the same year. It seems like people are pretty excited about both hires. Dan Enos has had a very interesting career path all around the Southeast, but a lot of people very high on Travis Williams, an SEC guy kind of through and through. What are your thoughts? And then how do they compare to the fans' thoughts on how Sam Pittman did in his first real test of reconfiguring the staff?
Yeah, I think fans overall are excited. Travis Williams, a younger guy, brings a lot of energy. I think he really connects with the players. That the whole defensive staff, and really the guy that we're not talking about, we talk about so much newness. Deke Adams is the first defensive line coach that's been around for more than 1 year. I mean, you got to go back to John Scott, Kenny Ingram, Jamal Ashley, Derek LeBlanc. I mean, these are all 1-year coaches. Deke Adams is actually in his second year. It's probably one reason they've kind of had a hard time recruiting the interior defensive line over the years. But, he's back. And with those guys, it just seems like they all mesh really well together. With Dan Enos, I think some of the things that he can bring to the table are the more technical aspects of playing quarterback that will benefit KJ Jefferson, not only at Arkansas, but as he looks to further his career at the next level. I think back to 2015 when Dan Enos was at Arkansas before. Sam Pittman was offensive line coach at the time. And in 2015, Brandon Allen was kind of viewed as maybe a potential quarterback who could get drafted. But that changed a lot when Enos came into town. I mean, he had six touchdown games, 7 touchdown games. His completion percentage was much better. His efficiency rating was higher than any quarterback in program history. So had a really great year that year. Maybe you might say it was the best quarterback year ever at Arkansas. And I think a lot of that was just what Dan Enos brings to the table. And he's worked with a guy I think is kind of comparable in Jalen Hurts when he was at Alabama. He worked with Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones, Jalen Hurts. They're kind of similar quarterbacks, both wear number 1. Now I'm not saying he's, KJ is going to go on and lead his team to a Super Bowl or something like that, but he's comparable in a lot of ways. And I think that if you ask Alabama fans, Dan Enos really worked well with Jalen Hurts when he was there and helped him become a better quarterback. So I think those are the aspects where Enos's impact will make the biggest difference. We'll see if he's as good a play caller as Briles was, but the technical aspects, I think he'll be better.
Yeah, it's like the one thing KJ needs and the strength of Dan Enos are kind of mirror each other and kind of paired together nicely there. It is a lot of pressure. I mean, Sam is so matter of fact and so easygoing and such an easy guy to talk to that, like, I think he understands that because of last year maybe not realizing all the expectations. A lot of that was injury early on in the season, but just and to KJ as well. But like does the entire tenure hinge on these hires? Is there another round of hires if they sit around that 6-7 win range with these guys? Like, what is your thoughts sort of on expectations packaged with these 2 decisions to hire these guys? I guess it's more than just one, but just the rebuild of the staff at this point in Sam's tenure versus last year and expectations. I don't know if that question makes any sense, but it feels like I'm assuming Sam's probably just matter of fact about it. Like, yeah, these are pretty important hires. We got to get them right,
Yeah, that was a lot. I will say that everything seems fine until it doesn't suddenly. And, I don't think anybody's talking about Sam Pittman's future at Arkansas being in jeopardy or anything right now. But again, it seems like that kind of stuff happens when it happens. Like it's just sudden, like his job's in trouble, obviously losing to Liberty last year shouldn't have happened. They should not have lost to Liberty. They would have won 8 games last year. So that's definitely a mark on his resume. Obviously KJ Jefferson was probably too hurt to play in that game. Shouldn't have played in the game, but looking ahead, the schedule, the way it shapes up, you've got 3 games at home. The first game's in Little Rock. You play BYU among those first few games. And then it's just like this ridiculously long stretch, like 5 weeks before you play a game in Fayetteville, because you have the Arlington game. You're the home team there. You have this long stretch when you don't have a home game. And then I think you play Florida maybe or Mississippi State. I can't remember. Then I think it's a bye week after that. So it's just kind of weird how the schedule shapes up. I do think that these were obviously very important hires, especially for the time, at Arkansas. The thing that Sam Pittman has proven with his coaching hires over the years, if you're not a great recruiter, you're not going to stick around very long. He has made every single change that I can see largely based on recruiting. And he's got some really strong recruiters right now, on this team. But important hires. I think they needed to change the mojo up on defense, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show. I think that with Dan Enos, I don't know that they needed to change so much. I mean, they were pretty solid on offense. Where they needed to change was getting stronger. And the first thing that Sam Pittman did after the Missouri game, the last game of the regular season, was make a change at strength coach. The whole strength staff, the whole nutrition staff has been redone. And I think if you go back and look at some of the goal line situations they were in, where they just could not get a push. You've got a 245-pound quarterback, and all these veteran offensive linemen. It's supposed to be the strength of your team, and you can't get a push time after time after time. I can't count how many times they struggled to convert at the goal line last year, and it really cost. I mean, look at the Texas A&M game. There was a game-changing moment, maybe a season-changing moment when you talk about momentum. Where you're trying to, I don't know if KJ should have been diving from 12 yards out. I mean, he does some Superman plays. Maybe he thought he could just do it, but it obviously didn't work out and went 97 yards the other way. But that was just kind of a precursor to several issues that they would have. And so I think addressing that is just as important as these coordinator changes, making sure that you have a guy in here that can help you win those short yardage situations.
You mentioned, I am going to ask about the offense in just a second, but you mentioned recruiting there. I mean, Arkansas, the SEC is just ridiculous. It's absurd, the level of recruiting that takes place in this conference. So you can be a top 25 class on average, across the country nationally and be 8, 9, 10, whatever it is in the SEC. They are the Arkansas's average recruiting class over the last 5 years, 9th in the SEC. Again, about top 30 in each one of those, which is solid. The portal is such a big part of this now. Where is this roster today in the spring, entering his third season? Like, where is it relative to each of the last couple of seasons overall? Like 1 to 85. We know what KJ brings to the table, but where is this roster relative to the last two springs? Let's say.
Yeah. Well, the spring before, it's way better. The 2 springs ago, it's way better. Last spring is probably comparable to last spring. I just think, when I was looking at the team last year, in the spring and in fall camp, I'm looking at them going, man, I mean, they are good to go at every single position. And then I started thinking, like, is everybody feeling about the team they cover? Because you're able to go out into the transfer portal. They added 9 scholarship guys in the transfer portal, and each one of those guys played a major role. Like, every one of them filled a spot where otherwise you'd have a freshman or a redshirt freshman, an unproven player. So I was just looking at him last year. It's like, man, this might be the best looking starting 22 that I've ever seen at Arkansas. Like, that good. The problem is Ole Miss also probably felt that way. Mississippi State, Florida, everybody else, feeling the same way on that. So I think that's probably something you have to take into account there. I really like where they are at wide receiver. They've added a lot of transfers and guys. Just to address this, first of all, we talk about Arkansas being 8th, 9th in the SEC, still being a top 25 school. Arkansas is the smallest state in the SEC. Right there, Mississippi and Arkansas, about 3 million people. Mississippi produces way more Division I prospects than Arkansas per capita. I mean, they're a great talent producing state. And I think Arkansas might have like 4 4-stars in the state this year. Mississippi has like 14, just to put it in perspective, same size states. That's the problem for Arkansas. It's not facilities, it's not money, boosters, fan support, the area. I mean, Northwest Arkansas is annually one of the top 5 places to live in the country on U.S. News and World Report. The facilities are top notch. I mean, there's nothing about Arkansas that they're lacking except for, that 250-mile radius of being right there. Atlanta, they don't have an Atlanta in Arkansas, So that's the problem for Arkansas. The transfer portal can alleviate that a lot for the Razorbacks, because you've got players that they've been through the recruiting process. They've seen what's out there. They've been in a program. They realize that, maybe it's not all about staying close to home, or maybe I just heard what I needed to hear at this place, and it's not what I thought it was. And they've been through the hoopla of it all. And we've seen Arkansas really capitalize. I mean, you look at last year, bringing Drew Sanders in from Alabama. The guy's got a great chance of being a first-round draft pick. And Jaden Hazelwood, probably wasn't the same player after his knee injury, but it was one time the number 4 ranked prospect in the country, could have gone just about anywhere out of Oklahoma. Some of the other guys, they've got John Ridgway the year before last from Division II school, and they've done that with wide receivers this year. I think Isaac TeSlaa could end up being the top wide receiver for Arkansas. Very prolific Division II guy. And so I think that's what you see in the portal, guys that were overlooked and maybe matured late, and they're options from smaller schools, and then guys from bigger schools. Hey, Arkansas will take everybody that Georgia that can't get past second team at Georgia, and is looking for somebody else. And they've done a good job at getting guys like that. They brought in Latavius Brini last year. I mentioned Jaheim Singletary, who's a former 5-star recruit. That's an area where I think where Arkansas can bridge the gap, and they've got some work. They brought in a lot of transfer. There is 12 transfers here, or 10 transfers on campus right now, something like that. I can't remember. It's like 10 recruits and 12 transfers, or the other way around, one or the other. But they have a lot of guys enrolled. But I've got them at 77 scholarship players, and you can have 85. There'll probably be a guy or two hop in the portal after spring when the next window opens. But they've got at least 8 spots remaining to continue to brush up this roster.
Obviously, with KJ Jefferson, you have sort of a win now mentality, and that's very difficult in the SEC, where all 14 teams right now feel like they're happy. Which I can't. You've covered this league a long time. I can't remember the last time all 14 teams were happy in April. It's beyond comprehension, honestly. But we all sort of know, and I've talked to a lot of people around the league they look at this year, and it's an important year and it's a big year, but a lot of people are gearing up for adding Texas and Oklahoma, which is obviously very important for Arkansas for a lot of reasons. But obviously the playoff. And so I guess one 2-part question, what are reasonable expectations fan-wise for 2023? And how much are people, fans, media, administration, coaching staff focused on sort of the long-term view of we should be competing for playoff spots, top 12 in the country every how many years? Like what are the short-term expectations and what are the long-term expectations?
Well, that's a good question. The landscape has changed so much. You used to say, you would like to compete for something like that every 4 years or so, rebuild your roster, get it back. And now you can compete right away. So it's hard to say. Fans are fickle and they're not willing to wait around very long. So maybe what the realistic expectation is for Arkansas versus a fan expectation could be quite different. It wasn't that long ago that Arkansas in 2006, went 7-1 in the SEC. Had a great squad with Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, Peyton Hillis, all those guys. A few years later, 2010, 2007 was a good year too, also, but 2010, they won 10 games. 2011, they won 11 games. And then, the Bobby Petrino incident happened, and, everything completely fell apart, which I guess Arkansas maybe that's their fault for being, having morale. For having, what's a compass? What's the word I'm looking for? When you look around the SEC and, you got Bobby Petrino's been hired, Hugh Freeze has been hired, Chris Beard has been hired. It's like,
I'm with you.
So Arkansas is the only one that cares, but
Nate Oates is coaching basketball, whatever.
Yeah. No. I think it's hard to say like what the expectation should be, but I think this year, like, they should win 8 games at least, and there's a give or take. If you're on one side of it, then it's a disaster. If you're on the other side of it, then, hey, it's a great season. That 9-win season that they had 2 years ago, which I mentioned, the roster last year was better looking than that roster. The 9-win season they had 2 years ago, that was viewed as a breakout season. And they won 7 last year, and it's just like, and that the truth of it is that 9-win season was probably a year ahead of where, they probably overachieved. They won a lot of close games then. Last year, they just lost a lot of close games. And that's why it's so difficult in the SEC, because so many games are decided by a kick or, a short yardage situation or a decision to go for it on 4th down that doesn't work out or that does work out. It's just the margin for error is so razor thin. That's why it's so important to have great coaches. Why these guys are paid so much money. Because a lot of times when you look at these rosters, they're quite comparable. And Arkansas they've got a solid roster. You've got a returning starter, 3rd-year returning starter in KJ Jefferson, a known commodity there. They have to replace a lot on the offensive line, but they've got they have recruited really well on the offensive line, as you would expect from a Sam Pittman coach team. They've recruited really well. He and Coach Cody Kennedy on the offensive line. And, one of these wide receivers is going to burst out and be a go-to guy. I don't know which one yet. Maybe Tesla, maybe Andrew Armstrong, maybe Tyrone Braden. But one of these guys is going to be a go-to guy. One of them is going to be a deep threat. One of them is going to be, a hands guy. It's going to emerge some kind of way like that. You've got a 1,400-yard rusher back, and I think they've got better energy on defense overall. So I think they have a chance to be better than last year. But whether the record shows that or not, it's just hard to tell in this conference.
Is it fair to go like once every 8 years? Because now that's kind of like
so.
that's like 2 rebuilding cycles for all teams that aren't not like Alabama, Ohio State, whatever. Like, is it fair to say of those programs like that have the resources and the money that Arkansas has, the fan support that they have? You've already alluded to sort of the limitations on the recruiting base, but like you still can get into Texas. If you go 10 wins every 8th year and you make the playoff, is that? I would say that's pretty solid.
They can make up for that in the transfer portal with the recruiting issue. And I think that's a big part of this. And I think that's maybe why you change what your expectations are, that maybe you can have, like I said, and if the college football playoff was 12 teams back in 2010 and 2011, Arkansas would have gone back-to-back years to the college football playoff. If it was back in, 2006, they would have gone. So, but if you judge, the problem, is Arkansas made some bad hires. They made some bad decisions from 2011, up until when Sam Pittman was hired. The Chad Morris hire was an absolute disaster. And, that's what I always tell people, like when they're saying, hey, it could be worse. Well, that's not the measuring stick for Arkansas. The 2018, 2019 is not the measuring stick for Arkansas football. I think it's back more towards, Houston Nutt era, Bobby Petrino era, that time, where you pop up and Houston Nutt went to the SEC championship game, 2 times, I think. And, another time probably should have gone, but fell short. Petrino didn't ever make it, but had, again, 10-win season, 11-win season. They finished 5 in the country, in 2011. So every 8 years, I don't know. I might say
maybe less than that. Yeah.
Maybe you could say less than that for an SEC program. You don't necessarily have to win the SEC and, beat Alabama every year. But Arkansas football is the 2010s were the worst era of Arkansas football in history. Like since 2011, like the 8-year stretch, you can't find a worse 8-year stretch. You can't find a worse 4-year stretch, than in that realm there. And that's just, there's no excuse for Arkansas football to be that. It's a very proud program. You look back at most all-time top 25 lists, you'll see Arkansas somewhere around 20th, as the 20th best program in the country. And I think a lot of people, especially probably young people, don't realize that because, 2012 through 2019 was just so awful.
So, all right, I'm going to ask you a very random non-football question here, okay? And you might be the right guy to talk to. You might not be. I don't know.
Okay.
But wife and I were taking our 2 little girls. They're going to be at the time 6 and 5. Love the outdoors, love hiking, like swimming. We're going to the lakes here. We got to pick a lake. Of all the lakes from basically Lake of the Ozarks down to what is it, LaRue right there outside of Bentonville. Which of the lakes? Is it Table Rock Lake? Like which of the lakes should I be taking the family to do some hiking? Yeah. Some hiking, like a little cabin on the water, do some fishing, do some canoeing. Like where?
I'm the worst person to ask for this. I don't know. Beaver Lake.
Beaver Lake. Okay.
Yeah, I would say maybe Beaver Lake. I'm not like my outdoor time. If I can spend it outdoors, it's going to be on the golf course. So I might be the worst person to ask.
No. So
there was a time years ago. My wife's not much of an outdoors person, so. That pretty much makes me not much of an outdoors person unless I'm playing golf.
Well, so here's the thing. I want to take them on a hike, but then I want to go like golfing. You know what I mean? Like we don't want to do like Lake of the Ozarks because it feels just way too busy and like too much stuff going on. I would look into
Devil's Den maybe.
Devil's Den. Okay. All right.
I'm not sure what golf courses are around Devil's
Den. All right. Okay. Well, listen, here's the thing.
Area.
Arkansas fans who are listening, and Missouri fans who might be listening. Anything within the area, you give us some advice here on which lake we need to go to. Right now,
That's
I'm
what you
kind
need
of
to do. Yeah, ask the fans.
let us know. We need kind of a nice combo of like, all right, couple nice meals, maybe a golf course, some good outdoor stuff, some canoeing. Like we need kind of a combination of everything to try to keep all three of my women happy, Trey. So that's how.
That's tough.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it goes. Thank you so much for your time, man. We really appreciate you. And we'll talk to you guys. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks, man.
Okay. Thanks, Braden.
All right, that was Trey Biddy, of course, of hogsports.com, 24/7 sports covering Arkansas. He says basically as good a roster as they've seen in Arkansas in the last 10 years or so. And again, that led to a decrease in wins by 2 last year, but a lot of that was injuries. The quarterback, now they got 2 new coordinators. Huge offseason for Sam Pittman, Erin. So before we get back into our rankings, where's Arkansas? Where's Oklahoma in all of this? And we'll reset our rankings. I just am curious, in general, how concerned are we now that they've had to hire 2 new coordinators and revamp the staff? You still got KJ Jefferson. Are we where are we? What's the relationship status between you and Sam?
Oh, I mean, I'm pretty loyal. We all know. I think that one of we talked about that as such a plus when that staff was able to stay together for like the past, really a lot of them since Sam Pittman became head coach. And as much as that is a benefit when you can kind of keep that continuity season to season, I also think that because of the kind of coach he is and his emphasis on people, I think he can also put together a culture quickly, not just maintain one. So, I mean, it's always a little bit of a speed bump when you have somebody new in place, but it can also kind of re-energize you. I don't think it'll put him back too much.
I think, as I said in the interview, I don't know how Dan Eno says the offensive coordinator works out long term, but I think it's a really good fit for KJ Jefferson right now.
Right.
So we'll see. But again, and Ole Miss and Neil McCready talked about this last week on the show. Everyone's sort of eyeing 2024. Texas and Oklahoma are going to join. We're going to have new schedules. We're going to have a 12-team playoff. It's just going to be so different that we have new levels of expectation. And I think the 2 levels in the SEC are national championship expectations and college football playoff expectations. I think those are 2 very different things. And so just real quickly to reset our rankings, I have Alabama at 1, Georgia 2, LSU 3, Florida 4, Tennessee 5, Auburn 6, Texas A&M 7. And again, Tennessee, unlimited resources and a far better recruiting base than anyone acknowledges. The 6-hour radius around Knoxville gets you down to almost Jackson, Mississippi, Columbus, Ohio, almost all of the entire state of Tennessee, all of Kentucky, most of Alabama, most of Georgia, most of South Carolina, most of North Carolina, and almost to Richmond, Virginia. It is just a far better recruiting base than anyone realizes. So I think Tennessee, as we've seen, didn't take Josh Heupel long to sort of realize their potential again in Knoxville, but I don't think they're better than Oklahoma. So where would you, on that list, where would you put Oklahoma?
After LSU. So I had Bama, Georgia, Florida, LSU. I probably put Oklahoma in there. Then I had Tennessee. Then I rethought this when we talked through it, but I did have A&M and then Auburn, although one has more of a history to be able to prove it than the other. So I think that's where I am on the top. That would put us through what? That would put us through 9
the
spots.
Top 9. Yep. 9 teams in the future SEC have national championship DNA. And if you think about what's going on around the country,
I didn't put Texas in, but yeah.
And I would have, so I actually agree with you on Oklahoma. I would have Texas at 3 on my list, and I'd have Oklahoma behind LSU and Florida.
Yeah, me too.
But ahead of Tennessee and Auburn and A&M.
Right, yeah.
So, but again, if there's 9 teams that have national championship DNA in the SEC, you look around, and there may not be 9 others in the entire country, right? Like it's Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State.
Yep.
Probably Clemson, Florida State.
You already said Ohio State.
Okay.
Didn't
Florida,
you?
Yeah, Ohio State. The 3 Big Ten teams: Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, USC.
Yep.
And
we leaving somebody out?
Maybe Oregon.
I was going to say the Oregon was a question mark in my mind. That's the only other one that was coming to mind. I know we're going to piss somebody off because I know we're forgetting something. But
no, maybe Nebraska, maybe UCLA. That's it. Like North Carolina is not competing for national titles in football. Virginia Tech's not. Wisconsin is not. Iowa is not. And this is the tier where Arkansas and South Carolina, I think, are better programs than all those names we just mentioned that have not competed, but are still not able to win national championships. They have not shown us that skill or that ability since integration.
Yeah, we've just had like one-off, very impressive teams. Like, I mean, like Kansas State has had some great years, obviously Cincinnati, but it's nothing that we, as of right now, the evidence we have, that we think is going to be super repeatable.
Washington would be in that conversation. They won a split national title early in the 90s, but again, their recruiting geography is a little bit more challenging than, let's say, South Carolina.
Do you say Miami? You did say Miami.
Let's get to Arkansas and South Carolina then, because what's the better job? Arkansas has far more history of success. They have equal levels of passionate fan base, equal levels of like resources for their athletic departments and their programs. The recruiting base for South Carolina is far better, as Trey Biddy just explained. Just per capita, the state of Arkansas just doesn't produce a lot of talent relative to South Carolina or even the surrounding areas. But somehow, some way, South Carolina has yet to sort of figure it out. Arkansas at least has had that in the past.
Right.
I think I would go Arkansas. I guess it would be 8, South Carolina 9.
And
the only question for South Carolina is sort of just like, why? Why hasn't it clicked? They have every piece of the puzzle you need to be at the highest levels in the SEC.
This is a really hard one, because I actually feel like both of these schools would be really, really great jobs, and they're not bad places to be in the large scheme of some of the actual locations of SEC schools.
Two great places. Yeah, I'm down with that.
Yeah, I mean, exciting, like game day atmosphere at South Carolina. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than like a game, like a Saturday in Columbia. I mean, it's insane. If you haven't been to a game, it's crazy. I feel like, for some reason, I feel like if South Carolina can figure it out, it's going to happen faster. But I do think that if Arkansas could get there, they could probably maintain it. For me, it just feels like there are so many things right at South Carolina's fingertips that I don't know what the missing piece is, but I'll put them ahead of Arkansas for this particular conversation. Just because I think when it happens, it's going to happen quick. Hopefully it does. And then just be like the ability to maintain it. But I don't know what that missing piece is.
Well, Spurrier kind of showed us the upside, right? With the three straight winning 11 win seasons, the Connor Shaw years,
right?
Who in my mind, South Carolina fans. I think Connor Shaw is the most underrated SEC quarterback in the history of the conference. I think he is one of my favorite players of all time in the history of the league. Not just because I'm also follically challenged, but because I just think he's a damn winner, man. Like, dude never threw interceptions. He won a bunch of games, took South Carolina to the SEC championship game. I just think he's a winner, man. Dude's a gamer. But other than that chunk of time, you've just never seen it. And I know they've only been in the league since 92. I'm curious if going away from divisions helps Arkansas and South Carolina. I don't know if it will. I can't tell if it will or not, because you're adding Texas and Oklahoma to the schedule. So that's pretty brutal.
Yeah, but when you're on when you got that west side of the conference in recent years, it's pretty brutal.
So I've talked to a lot of people around South Carolina, and I just go, first of all, one big glaring difference, Clemson. Clemson is a giant glaring difference in the state. You have Georgia and Clemson within whatever miles of drive.
We didn't name them in that list we just rattled off.
No, I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
But there's none of that in Arkansas. There's no other big name program in the state. Like you got to go over to Oklahoma, you got to go down to Texas to get to anybody. You're talking hundreds of miles,
right?
Whereas Georgia, South Carolina, Clemson are they're all pretty close,
right?
So I think that works against South Carolina. But the thing that I keep hearing from folks who've covered the program for a very long time is that there is just something's missing at the top, like whether it's just the alignment we were talking about earlier with Bama and Clemson. Maybe they just don't have the same like level of commitment deep down in their bones or something. Like, that's not the case for the average fan. I just don't. No one has an explanation for why South Carolina has not been able to capitalize on 85,000 fans, unlimited resources, and great recruiting territory.
I just don't know if it's I don't know if it's on the top of my mind because you're just talking about Connor Shaw, but with those teams, and that would have been the same Marcus Lattimore was here at the same time, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like
Alshon
2011 to 12, 13.
Alshon, and that was prior to sort of Clemson's like that. What they did is they dominated in the state, and they got Alshon Jeffrey and Stephon Gilmore and Marcus Lattimore, and they dominated. And frankly, I think Shane Beamer was a part of those recruiting classes. But not like Clemson hadn't become Clemson yet,
right?
So it was easier to win those battles.
It does feel like year to year, like maybe it's maybe, and this is not discrediting because I'm not, maybe I'm flawed in saying this, but maybe there's some on the field leadership factors that South Carolina has kind of ebbed and flowed in terms of having those on the field, like dynamic upperclassmen leadership in and out. I'm not saying that it's not there, but when we think about these, like, you can call them franchise guys or whatever you want to call them, I do feel like there have been some. I did not spend time inside the program, but maybe I'm just presenting it really as a question and not necessarily as a diss. Right. But
but who's responsible for getting those guys? That's Nick Saban's job. That's the head coach's job. And if you put Nick Saban at South Carolina and at Arkansas, my question is, can they win SEC championships? Like I'm talking routinely every year, beat Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, A&M. Routinely beat all of those teams, win SEC championships, and win national championships, which is now going to be 3 or 4 games in a playoff against teams like Ohio State, Clemson, and USC.
And that just changes the conversation again, because to be able to do it, win 4 more games is, God, the depth that it takes, which in depth takes time. It's interesting. There's a reason we're stuck on South Carolina and Arkansas and having this long of a conversation about it, is because they really do feel on the cusp. And I can't rule it out that they would be able to do that if, like, they had the Nick Saban situation going on. But I mean, there's a reason we're dwelling right here.
I know these are the two that you can't figure out. Yeah. Because I think they're clearly better than the rest of the league. But I don't think you can put them ahead of anyone who's actually won a national championship since integration, which is everybody but A&M above you. Yeah. And so I don't think he can. I think if you put Nick Saban at A&M, he could win a national title. I don't think he wins a national championship at Arkansas or South Carolina. But we just heard Trey Biddy say this with Sam Pittman as the coach, not Nick Saban, Sam Pittman. What's a reasonable expectation for Arkansas? Probably get to the playoff every 6 years or so. I think that's fair. We heard Ole Miss say that. Neil McCready say that last week. I think Ole Miss getting to the playoff with Lane Kiffin every 6 to 8 years. Once every 6 to 8 years is about right. That's a 10-win season every 6 to 8 years. I think that's totally fair for South Carolina, totally fair and doable for Arkansas. And I think Sam Pittman and Shane Beamer could do that. I think Lane Kiffin can do that. I think Mark Stoops can do that at Kentucky. The question is, but no one's picking any of those teams to win the SEC or win 3 playoff games.
No, that would be hard to do at this point. And for some reason, even though on paper Arkansas has more of a tradition or a history of being able to do it, for some reason I do feel like the ceiling's higher on South Carolina. I kind of am with you. It's just like a gut. It's not. Can't really tell. Yeah. Like, give you like a written reason why, but I just feel like the ceiling's higher. And honestly, I do think they have potential. If we're talking about them teetering on that line, I think I could put South Carolina above it at some point. Ooh. But I don't think
0 SEC championships. 0.
I'm just speaking. I'm speaking from a gut feeling. I just feel like they have what it takes, or could have what it takes, but it's hard. I mean, all it takes is if you find your Nick Saban, and maybe Shane Beamer is their version of Nick Saban. Who knows? That would be an outlandish thing to think, but maybe it's possible. If all of a sudden Dabo retires and Clemson can't hire a coach and they keep pissing down their leg for a decade, that is where South Carolina, with the right coach, all of a sudden dominates their recruiting base, and their recruiting base is way better than Arkansas's. That's the difference. Yeah. In my mind. Whereas Arkansas is the only hog in town, I should say. South Carolina. I've got 2 kids. It's fine. South Carolina is like as we've said, they're competing with a lot more big brands, but all it takes is like 1 or 2 bad hires by Clemson. Yeah, just pull in Auburn for a minute. Right. Florida have a fire over there, and then like have to worry about that, and South Carolina can sneak in.
maybe Florida's still playing with its PUD for 10 years, and all of a sudden South Carolina is the most dominant program in that region or that chunk of the. And now Georgia's Georgia right now, but whatever. All right, so here's the next question: who's next?
Yeah, there's like a grittiness to them that I think are like that
Yeah.
Arkansas doesn't really have too.
So who's next? Ole Miss, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Missouri. I think we both agree Vanderbilt, sadly, is 14th.
Oh yeah, and I think
Okay.
on this list they're 16th because aren't we doing
Yes.
Oklahoma and Texas? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
So they're
agreed,
16th.
agreed.
I just pushed them down 2 more spots. Sorry.
Against teams that aren't even in the league, you're ranked behind them.
I went Ole Miss next.
I've got Ole Miss next as well.
Okay. Why?
Again, national championship pre-integration, so I don't really count it, but they've shown that upside. They've had some 10-win seasons. Oxford is an extraordinary place to be and live. It's just awesome. Lane Kiffin
not that much like they also don't have that crazy no, not really though.
Not super nuts, but like they had their Hugh Freeze moment in the sun.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I mean, in terms of so many cooks in the kitchen, like Ole Miss University of Mississippi administration is not going to step on the toes of athletics through and through. They want to win.
That's true.
And they've had to kind of get used to having some off years and they figure out how to have fun anyway. But I don't think they're going to get in each other's way.
I think I agree with you exactly. And I think there's enough history with like Archie Manning, Eli Manning, David Cutcliffe winning there. And then you go Lane Kiffin like both Hugh Freeze, for whatever you think about Hugh Freeze and Lane Kiffin, had there been a 12-team playoff in place, both Hugh Freeze and Lane Kiffin would have made the playoff. So they clearly have playoff potential. They clearly have 10-win playoff potential. And that, to me, makes them better than Kentucky, which over a long period of time has rarely been competitive against Florida and Tennessee and Georgia in their division. And Kentucky is just now kind of catching up with all the things you need to have to be successful. It's got to be more than just Mark Stoops for me to buy into Kentucky. And there's this whole Kentucky's maybe not willing to invest in NIL yet, so I'm going to put that behind Ole Miss as well. But I do think Kentucky's grown a lot in this process over the last 10 years. But I would have Ole Miss clearly next. Then I would have Kentucky. I would have Kentucky.
I would Mississippi State next.
I understand that too. I get that too. Starkville's just awful. I love you, Starkville.
Oh my God. The one and only time I ever drank Boone's Farm, Starkville, Mississippi.
It's just
Walmart wine, ain't it? It's just not.
You're like, you look to your left and there's Alabama, you look to your right and there's Ole Miss, and you're kind of like, well, those are pretty cool places. And they have more money, they have more fans. Now, Mississippi State's got this really cool, like, blue collar culture, which I think is really fun, but it's just a tough place to win, man. It is.
It is. It's just, there's something about sometimes the bad factors, like I take them into account as a good thing because there's truly nothing else to do. So get back to the field. What else are you going to do? There's some kind of push pull of like, there's nothing, like a lot of kids, this is true of a lot of places. I mean, it's true of Memphis with basketball and all sorts of stuff, like kids growing up there, like that's kind of what they have, especially from certain socioeconomic classes. So I do think that the lack of other things to do can sometimes, when we're this low in the rankings, go in your favor. I mean, I've talked a lot about how I love what Mark Stoops has done, and I think he's doing it the right way. I did teeter with those two back and forth, but I put Mississippi State for Kentucky. I
think Kentucky, because it's got kind of its own brand and its own recruiting territory, really, of any school in the SEC. Like, it's the only one who can go into Ohio and say, come play in the SEC. And like, Tennessee does that to some degree, but it's the only one. Like, Mississippi State is so deep behind, like, LSU recruits Mississippi State's territory. So does Alabama. So does Auburn. So does Ole Miss. So does Florida State.
True. And it's not a hard sell if you're getting LSU offer and your choice are LSU, Mississippi State. No, that's Starkville.
Kentucky had hard sellouts, 55,000, 56,000 plus. They've invested like crazy. I see the argument for Mississippi State. I think they're a better football program long term, but I think right now, I think Kentucky's the better job, and not just
they're
because
neck and neck,
but they're basically even. And that's why they play and crossover every year.
The next two are easy.
Missouri to me was easy. The next one, but I will say this: I think Missouri has playoff DNA as well. because they had 2 SEC East Division titles, one more than South Carolina, by the way, in far fewer years in the conference. So that they were 1 win away had they beaten Auburn from getting to the national championship game.
I'm sure South Carolina is really going to love you for us, like kind of gloating on them. And then you're like, by the way, Missouri is a little bit kind of better.
No, they're not. I've got South Carolina ranked clearly ahead of Missouri. But Missouri,
sorry, everyone. He just has to. It's kind of his thing.
Missouri has, in 2007, they were 1 win away from the national championship game with Chase Daniel. They lost to Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game. They played in 2 SEC championship games. So just in the last 20 years, they've had 3 trips to the playoffs. So they're clearly a playoff caliber team when things are right. Same thing for Kentucky, Mississippi State. Same thing for Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Arkansas. When they're good, they can make the playoff. I don't think any of those teams can go 12-0 in the new SEC routinely and then win 3 more games plus an SEC championship game and win a national title, even if they have Nick Saban as their coach.
The odds to get to the playoffs, obviously, a lot more teams will get to enjoy that, but making it through it's a whole different beast.
We are tricking ourselves. This is celebrating Final Four and Sweet 16 banners in college basketball is what this is. Like if Kentucky and Ole Miss and Missouri and South Carolina and Arkansas get to the playoff, they will put a banner in their stadium that says College Football Playoff 2028.
Mm-hmm.
And they should, and they absolutely should. But you don't. The national championships are not going to. I don't think that it's going to be even harder now to win national championships.
It's just a lot more that is an insane amount of additional football to play. I mean, it would be like, to me, so how many you play how many rounds?
Well, 16 is the championship game right now. So you're adding basically 1 more round, but for only those 2 teams. The key is like, I don't know, you're
like
an SEC championship game plus 3 or 4 playoff games.
That is so much more football. It's insane. I mean, that is like March Madness being 3 times the amount of rounds that it already is. I mean, the wear and tear of the sport. I'm not discrediting basketball. I mean, lots of wear and tear there too, but that is a lot more football to play, and it takes a lot more depth. There will be more injuries the later year into the season. I mean, it adds factors that we haven't even talked about, like how much more recruiting you're going to have to do to continue your run in that postseason play because of the depth your roster needs to get there.
We've said this a million times. The 12-team playoff is awesome because it creates drama in the regular season for games like Mississippi State, Kentucky could become a very important game. Ole Miss, Arkansas could be a playoff game in the future, right? Like Tennessee, Kentucky could be a playoff game in the future. These games have so much gravity now in the regular season, but we are tricking ourselves into thinking that the championship race is more wide open. It is not. In fact, I think
it narrows itself.
Because it's even harder to win the national championship. It's far easier to get into the playoff, much harder to win the title.
Totally.
So we're going to give like, hey, great season, team X, Y, and Z on a playoff spot. And you know what? I think that team can pull some upsets, maybe win a game or 2 in the playoff. I do not think they can win 4 and win a national title.
I mean, it's, and then that will continue, and the conversation can expand from there that's for a different day. But then you get into the depth, you get into how much you're doing NIL because you now have to have more people. You get into
portal
size, you get into resources needed for training, like money spent on posts. I mean, it's a whole nother beast, but we'll address that when we get there.
There you have it.
Yes.
So there are rankings. Here's my list in order with Texas and Oklahoma for those that care. Number 1, Bama, Georgia 2, Texas 3, LSU 4, Florida 5, Oklahoma 6, Tennessee 7, Auburn 8, A&M 9. There's my national championship DNA line. Arkansas 10, South Carolina 11, Old Mississippi 12, Kentucky 13, Mississippi State 14, Missouri 15, Vanderbilt 16. That is my order. Erin, what is your final order?
We added Texas and Oklahoma late, so hopefully I don't screw this up. Alabama, Georgia, Florida, LSU, Texas. Is that where I put Texas?
Maybe.
Texas, Tennessee, Texas A&M.
You had Oklahoma. Right, you had Oklahoma above all those. Some of those.
Oh, that's right. I put them above Tennessee, didn't I?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm going from memory now. Oklahoma, Tennessee,
A&M. You had A&M.
A&M, Auburn. Then
Auburn.
I went South Carolina, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Missouri, Vanderbilt.
Yep. I think we got it right. And there you have it. Rate, review, subscribe. Check out the YouTube page as well. Of course, we do appreciate you there. You can always catch our beautiful smiling faces there. And if you want to comment about how stupid we are or how smart we are or how amazing we are or how terrible we are, please do so at Braden Gall on Twitter. Erin, where can people get to you?
Please know I'm relatively unaffected, but Erin_Dugan on Instagram, relatively, and the Erin Dugan on Twitter.
I am very affected. My day-to-day happiness is tied directly to other people's strangers' opinions about my college football takes.
That's partially true and partially not.
It's not true at all, but we love you for listening. For Erin Dugan, my name is Braden Gall. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks to Trey Biddy for giving us a lot of his time as well. We will be back next week. Easy for me to say. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Peace.